Hey everybody, it's Rajesh here.
And Tane here.
Welcome to our podcast, Baskets of Knowledge, Chats with a Difference. In our podcast, we invite guests from around the country and around the world to talk about how they got to where they're at the moment. It's about a journey, it's about an experience, it's about their life. Kia ora koutou, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Baskets of Knowledge. It's a pretty crazy time because in New Zealand, summer's about to come. So the weather is getting nice and warm, which means it's great for listening to our podcast while you're going for a walk. Isn't that fantastic? Tane, welcome to the podcast again.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, I guess.
Yeah, well, you are. This is your podcast, really. What am I saying? Welcome.
Yeah.
I guess we haven't seen you as much over the last few weeks with exams and things that are happening. So, Tane, I guess as we always go, what have you put into your basket of knowledge since we last spoke?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I've probably learned is that sometimes, we strive to get to certain milestones or certain goals, but I think something I've realized over the last couple of weeks is that sometimes we strive so much that when we actually get to the thing we want to do, it's not what we thought it was going to be. Or, for example, we want to do something and then we get rejected or we don't get the thing we wanted to get to, and then later on we get it, but we're not as excited to do it anymore. And so what I've learned from that is just being able to take a step back and go, okay, was it something I actually wanted, in the long run, or was it something I just wanted right here and now? And now that the focus has changed a little bit, maybe I don't, or and I'm not so passionate about it anymore.
Yeah, and that's so crazy because I guess there's an evolution of life, right? At some point in our lives, we need something, and then we want something, and sometimes the wants and the needs just get so mixed up that we don't realize what we actually want. It also reminds me of that there's that analogy of the mountain. When you get to the top of the mountain and you're like, oh, I reached the top, and you turn around and go, oh, there's actually another mountain to climb. And oh, unless it's Everest, obviously that's not going to happen. But there's always something that we are going for. And I guess that sort of dovetails into my learning from the last time we spoke. And I guess it's sometimes when you're doing things for good intentions, you do things for good intentions, but others don't see that as good intentions. And it's really hard to try and justify. Well, you actually don't. It actually shows that people see different things in different ways, and it's important to realize that, but also not to just pander if things get challenging. If people challenge you, like if you really are strong about what you really your vocation, your values around that, you don't have to pander. Just go, right, cool. Hey, there's a reason why I'm doing this here. But the world doesn't see that all the time. Oh, well, what a deep topic there. So with that, as always, we try and scour the country and the world to bring some amazing guests to our podcast because everyone has an amazing story. And our podcast guest today is no different. An amazing guest today. Welcome to our podcast, Aneesa.
Hi, so happy to be here.
Fantastic. I am very lucky to have known Aneesa for a very long time now. But Aneesa, do you want to tell our listeners a bit about who you are at this point in time in your life and where you are?
Yeah, sure. So, hi, I am studying at Otago, doing my master's in marine science. I'm working under a super cool supervisor who does a whole bunch of stuff on investigating how humans are stressing out the environment in different ways. So, really excited to be doing what I'm doing. I am finishing up my year and now I've got 2 months off, so I'm kind of just chilling. So, yeah, in a good little spot.
Ah, brilliant, awesome. And I guess that's where at the moment. But let's start at the beginning, Aneesa. As a year 13, when you were at school all those years ago, and if I said to you, hey, Aneesa, you'll be doing a master's program, what would you have said to me at that point, especially a master's in marine science? At that point in time, what would you have said to me?
I think I would have actually been so disappointed. Like I was not planning to go this far into research because I always kind of had it in my mind of like, oh, I'll get my little fun degree doing something I'm passionate about. I'll go work in a cool place. Like maybe it could be an aquarium or something working with people or something that I really got excited about. But I was never really that into just studying all the time. But I just really grew the study itch over my bachelor's. So, I would have actually been gobsmacked to hear that I was doing my master's. But yeah.
Yeah, you are exactly. It's crazy, right? So it's a
Happy
bit
to be
like
doing now.
Yeah, so crazy. Like what Tanya said just before, you'd have no idea what's going to happen, and when it happens, you would have finished a degree and been like, oh, wait a minute, this option has popped up, and you take it up. So let's go back to that year 13. So you're in year 13, you are finishing up school, you now have a choice of going to university, and what made you decide this is the area that you wanted to go down? Was it something that you realized from a very young age that this was an area, or was it something that you've developed as you're going through your study?
I think I definitely grew it. So I remember like when I was in primary getting like my fingers dipped into little things here and there, sort of like there was like one of my like key memories, making this super like deep and sentimental, but one of my key memories was like I think in year 5 I saw like a whole bunch of rubbish under one of our school's like decks, and then me and my friend made everyone in the school sign a treaty of like we will not litter, because I was like, this is gross. And then it was like little things like that here and there where the whole time that I was kind of going through primary and intermediate and high school, I always thought I was like leaning this way in studies or leaning to chemistry or leaning to, I don't know, the arts or history. But then there was always just like little things here and there that just like kept sparking my passion for ecology. And then there was trips to the two things that really sold it for me in high school were trips to the Island Bay Marine Centre in Wellington. Do you know it, Pradesh?
Maybe, I don't know. No, I don't think
Yeah.
so.
If you're in Wellington, would recommend it. It's like on the waterfront on a nice day, there's like touch tanks and everything, and it's just a really good outreach program. They get schools to go, and it's kind of just connecting people with marine science. So that really changed my mind of like, oh my God, the sea is just filled with life. There's so much cool things to research and investigate in there. And then that got me into doing an ambassador program with Zealandia. And also, even like, yeah, I was still tossing up like exactly what to do. When I came in first year, I had a really broad selection of papers to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. And then I really moved into ecology from there.
Yeah, it's awesome because a lot of our guests on here have basically said it was their formative year, something when they were really young,
Mm,
something they were really really young that really has they forgot about that. As you're growing up, you forget about that, but when you come back and think of where they're right now, it was that formative thing. Like for you, it was that at that age was really there. It's interesting because sometimes when you go through those formative processes, that at school you might have a teacher or your parents or your family go, okay, cool, that was cool, but now let's try something that's going to get you a job.
oh,
Because
yeah.
how many conversations would you have had with someone goes, ecology, what kind of job are you going to get?
Yep.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
often. So I'm Sri Lankan. My sister is older than me. So me and my sister, just the two of us. She had to like really deal with the brunt of like are you gonna be a lawyer or a doctor or I don't know, whatever the third option is. Um, and she really took the bullet on that. And then all of those questions were turned to me afterwards, and everyone just were like, "Oh, your sister's doing medicine. You are too, right?" And I was like, I don't know. Marine science sounds fun. And they'd be
yeah.
like, is that a real job?
Yeah,
So,
and I guess that's the next question is, what are the cultural contexts, because this is going to sound very, very general, but a lot of Southeast Asian families
mhm.
um have an expectation when the young person goes to a university that they're going to tick one of those doctor, lawyer, engineer boxes.
Yeah.
And you came along and said, I'm going to do marine science. Was there, you mentioned that, oh, is there going to be a job? What is that like for you traversing that? Because your sister was obviously doing the tech.
Yeah.
Uh, so here comes Aneesa not doing the tech. What is that like for you as a young person, I guess, in your family?
Yeah. It was definitely tricky. And I'm still sort of traversing it every time I catch up with the relatives. So my family is in like we're the only ones in our little family. Everyone else is in Australia and Sri Lanka. So we're the only ones in New Zealand. We're like connected to a Sri Lankan community. So whenever we, Christmas and events and stuff, we'll see everyone. Um, so I don't see them that much nowadays, but when I do see them, it is an interesting conversation because it's just, I think people will always kind of have you in the back of their mind as being like oh, that's like a fun little thing. I wonder when she's going to switch and go into law, like, but it's kind of been like the big conversations that I've had with people, and even just having those conversations multiple times with people where they've come to be like, oh, okay, this is something you're really passionate about, and you will get a job. And even like, as it's a huge, I think being a second generation immigrant, like my mum came here in 92 and I was born here. My mum just wants, me to be financially stable and succeed in whatever way that I want to, but just be like able to like feed myself at the end of the day. So it's just been like a lot of conversations to persuade her, like, yes, I will be fine. I don't have to be earning like the absolute top tier doctor, lawyer, engineer to be okay in my life, and I can still like do something that I enjoy. And I think as long as I'm like doing okay, she's happy. So that's kind of where the conversations end up at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I guess it'll all comes from a point of love and care. But also sometimes we have to temper those expectations, and expectations versus those passions. Like I said at the start there, it would have been so easy for you to go, okay, I'm just going to do this because everyone else thinks I should do it, whereas your heart is not in it, and you're just going to pander, and then you want to enjoy it. So it's really
Exactly.
awesome.
Yep.
Awesome that I guess you've got the support of your family as well. Now that you are, I mean, you're doing your masters, they'd be pretty proud of you. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So and then you have this little passion of yours, little at this point in time, it's a little passion because it's come from your formative years. You come to
Mhm.
university, and what is that like for you? So you leave Wellington to move away to a different city. What is that like for you as a young person now? Because again, close family community, I guess, to a place where it's a whole different world. What is that like for you?
Mhm. Yeah, it was mind-blowing. I actually loved it so much. So I think I'm the kind of person that definitely, because I lived in the same house my entire life in Wellington, never, you know, I'm the kind of person that gets sick of things pretty easily. So by the time of the end of my like high school experience, I was just clawing to get out. And Wellington's a lovely city. Like if I hadn't grown up there, I'd love to live there. But coming to Dunedin was just so wonderful. There was no kind of like when I came in first year, it was an interesting experience because I had few things in high school that I wanted to kind of change about the experiences that I had in high school. So coming into uni, I was like, oh, okay, I can finally be the person that I want to be. And I just kind of let loose so much. And then after that, sort of reined it back in. I was like, oh, okay, we don't need to like push ourselves that hard to try and be the perfect person. I can just like figure it out slowly. I don't have to have 1,000 friends and be doing exactly what everyone else is doing. So it was kind of like moving down here was definitely quite the whirlwind of really just kind of figuring myself out and having that so suddenly happen. But yeah, was eventually good.
Yeah, it's interesting because a few people that have been on the podcast have spoken about that, the authenticity, how do you
Mm.
actually find your authentic self? And Tane, when you came down, was that a challenge for you as well to balance your authentic self versus the expectation of being a first year student?
For sure, it was definitely a challenge, and especially, yeah, as you say, those first couple of weeks are probably the hardest because you don't really know anyone. Um, I had a rough idea of a couple of people who were moving into Studham, but not the vast majority. And so, the first thing you come to comfort with is, pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone just so that you can make these new friends. And I know that that's always challenging, especially coming from smaller areas as well. Smaller schools, smaller backgrounds. You feel like you have to, be known, or otherwise you're just going to be, in the corner and nobody's really going to know you. So for me, it was always about trying to push myself, and that's what I told my first years. Now that I'm, back as an RA, is in those first couple of weeks, you're going to want to go, 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 but you're going to find it challenging to say no if you always say yes, and especially when people just expect you to come along and go and do things. That's where you have to find that balance and be true to yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was exactly it for me.
and it's really hard, right? Because there's the social expectations and social norms that you think you have to buy into, and there's no right or wrong here. This is just a part of life, and some people find this very quickly, and some people don't. There's no right or wrong. It's just you have to find it though. You have to find it at some point, or have to you don't have to do it in life, but it's important for you to find that at some point. so now you're living this. You find yourself, you find who you are, and once you start discovering your university experience, what are the can you remember things that are so you've got your academic side, but
Mhm.
what are the other sides of you that actually start coming out where you go, actually, there's actually other cool things that get involved while I'm at university?
Oh yeah. So I well, because second year, kind of going off, figuring ourselves out. Second year is where I really started to feel a lot more like myself. And I think lots of the things that really helped that is figuring out where the scenes were that made me feel authentic to myself. So, in one regard of that, figuring out like where I could go to get my like nature. I think in first year it can be kind of isolating because you're just in a hall and lots of people don't really want to get out of that hall that much. You're just partying and going day to day. And even just especially in a big hall, it can really be such a study grind. So you're not really looking up from your books as much. And then in second year, I really figured out Quarantine Island. Have you ever been there? Yeah, so I've been volunteering there quite a bit. Been too busy this current year to get there as much, but that was such a saving grace for me because I was getting so much of what I needed back. Like just my regular doses of nature, figuring out other spots over lockdown as well. I don't know
Yeah,
if you guys got into walking over lockdown, but I definitely did.
yeah.
So yeah, so it's kind of going to like the glowworms, the reservoir, figuring out all those spots, and that helped so much. And then I think the other side of it was finding people that resonated a lot more with me. And I think at the end of first year, I kind of like as the year went on, I sort of came back into the way that I wanted to be in a way where I stopped pushing myself as hard. And then I found those people and I really stuck with those people and I felt a lot better being with them, like whether it was people that would accept me for being like a bit different, a bit like of an ecology nerd, for being like queer and not the typical Dunedin student, having those people that I could talk to when I was feeling like a bit outside of the box, even just like um not being like looking like a typical Dunedin student either, being like one of the few Sri Lankan people that I knew anywhere around Dunedin. So yeah, I think like two sides of the coin. I really like unlocked the nature side of myself in second year in terms of finding that in Dunedin and just the other parts of what made me feel authentic.
Awesome. There's so much to dive into there. The first thing I'm gonna talk about is, do you want to explain to our listeners a bit about what a quarantine island is?
Oh
Someone
yes.
who's understand.
Yeah, so if you're in Dunedin, would absolutely recommend it. Um, Quarantine Island. So there's talking about like quarantine islands. There's a few of them around New Zealand. I'm from Wellington. There's Soames Island there. Quarantine Island here, or Kamotorua, is an island where back when people were coming into New Zealand, those big boats, they would have a lot of people coming in with things like rubella and I don't know, the big things, the big scary things, and they would put anyone sick on these islands. And this one in Dunedin, it was, I think it was always in the hands of, I don't want to get my history too wrong here, but restoration work has been happening on the island for a really long time. And there was also just large patches of forestry on the island that they never took down. So it's kind of like remnant forest. And it's gone from like keeper to keeper, where nowadays it's quite the biodiversity sanctuary and it still has all its historical islands around, sorry, historical buildings around. Like it's got the married quarters where people that were married used to be quarantined off to. There's the island next to it, Goat Island, which the men were kept on and the women were kept on Quarantine Island. So you can go around the island and learn about the history, but it's also just got like all the beautiful forest. There's like skinks, there's lots of birds, and I do like lots of the help with the predator stuff and the lizard stuff and the bird surveys and doing tours. So it's a really good spot to just like go for a day trip and just get your mind off uni or work or anything else because it's quite the getaway.
It's pretty cool. It's so interesting. Hey, thinking about how in the past we had those islands where if you were not well, you were put into island and off you go. Thinking about at the moment we have all the cruise ships coming in. It's cruise ship
Mm.
season, and there's probably every kind of disease on those cruise ships, but the world has evolved. We don't do that anymore. We're like, cool, come along
Yeah,
and land. Isn't that crazy?
I know. History repeats itself. Like, not that we're going to repeat ourselves with the island thing, but it is just interesting to see, like, once again, the big boats bringing people over are the kind of like worry for the mainland. Because, yeah, same as back in the day. It was like the
Yeah.
plague and all those things.
Yeah, it's so crazy. When you reflect back on that, you go, it's exactly the same thing. You
Yeah.
have a large mass of people that have come from wherever they've come from with their own biogut, known disease, own bacteria, landing
Yeah.
in a place where these bacteria are not home. And
Hmm.
crazy
Yeah.
go, I'm sure we can go into that there.
Yeah.
So that's awesome that you found that, and I guess finding nature when you were in lock. I mean, I think lockdown was a good thing and a bad thing for a lot of people. I'm going to focus on
Mm.
positives
Yeah.
because there's a lot of bad things as well. But at least for you, lockdown was good because you managed to find that space. And I guess I'm just going to make a huge leap here, but you can always calm me down. I'm guessing
Hmm.
you getting into the green space was also good for your mental health and well-being.
Yeah, for sure. I think like first year, my mental health was a lot worse than it's been any year after that. And I think so accounting to a few different things, I really got in touch with like the mental health services in Otago, but also I think the finding the green spaces and then finding the things that were like much more relevant to my lifestyle than just drinking and studying and drinking and studying were a lot better ways to live than the way that, and especially like, first year halls are such a fun experience. They're like the best way to meet people, the best way to get immersed in the scene, but they're also quite socially draining. So I really, really enjoyed that in first year, but then in second year, I just needed to like take a step back, like be in a flat where I could just like have my downtime a bit and then go to nature when I needed to and not feel like there's like 10,000 other people around me. And I constantly, if I leave my hallway, I can start a conversation with anyone. It's like, okay, you can just like hop off to a bush, get some like, take your brain out of your head, just go for a walk, and it's fine. It's so much better.
Yeah, and it's crazy how we don't value that time there.
Mm.
I guess Tanya, how was that for you? Because in a position of responsibility as an RA, it must be pretty tough. It is tough. I'm not gonna say must be, because how do you separate yourself from your downtime and you've got to walk out the corridor and you see a young person, you're like, I don't want to talk to them, but I have to talk to them because I'm an RA. What is that like for you?
Yeah, it's definitely probably been the biggest challenge. Like there were different reasons why I wanted to become an RA, but I definitely didn't think that that was going to be such a struggle. Um, Especially in terms of, not just at the hall, but also outside of the hall. If I see someone passing in campus or at the gym, I kind of feel obliged that I have to say hello. Like as much as I want my downtime, I just know if I didn't say hello, it would come across rude, or maybe they think they've done something, and you just don't want to escalate things, so you always say hello. But on the flip side, it's also really nice to, when you're having a bit of a down day, and you're walking on campus and you see one of your residents and they come and say hello, you're like, oh, like I am still doing things that are meaningful, even if you're not having the greatest day or the greatest time, like right there and then. So it does have both sides, but it is hard, and it's especially hard in those first couple of weeks when everyone just wants to meet everyone, and you've got to try and be a role model in terms of stepping away from that and just showing them that there is plenty of time to get to know each other instead of just go go go, because that's not healthy in the long run.
Yeah, and it's crazy because again, like Aneesa said, in your first year, that's the expectation that you think you have to do. You have to go to everything, you have to say yes to everything, and it's really quite hard. So going to a flat is quite nice, I guess, sometimes. Yeah. The other thing I want to touch on, Aneesa, is you mentioned the fact that you were different. Those are the words. You were not your atypical Dunedin student for a lot of reasons there. Let's talk about being queer. So was that something that you were comfortable talking about when you were at high school and home, or is this something you became more comfortable as you came to university?
Yeah, I think I so I'd had like conversations with people throughout high school. My best friends were always there to talk to me about that stuff, but I was definitely not one that wanted to kind of make that open or anything. It was just something about myself that I knew. And then coming to university, sort of going back to what I was saying before about just letting loose, I was like, oh, okay, I can finally, be open about all these things. Like I'm in a different space. No one knows me. I can like really let loose and have my experiences that I want to have without anyone judging me. And then coming here and realizing that Dunedin is kind of, so I'm from Wellington, which I feel like I've already said that, but but Wellington is a really diverse town. And my school was it was a small school, but Newlands College, British, it's such a diverse school. We had like so many queer assemblies. The like ethnic makeup of the school was so diverse. And going from that little like pocket of wonderful acceptance coming down here, because Dunedin is like, there's definitely a lot of people that have come from all over New Zealand, so you do get that diversity. But on the other hand, the South Island is just quite
conservative.
Yeah, it's not quite like, not everyone is a Sri Lankan queer ecological student, to say it that way. And I kind of was a bit, yeah, I know, crazy. But it was kind of almost culture shock to like come down and be like, oh, okay, there's not as like open and as big of a queer scene as I thought. I found that in my later years. I found the scene, I found like people to be with and feel open with. And there definitely is a queer scene, but it's not put out there as strongly as Wellington. So it was kind of a hard thing to deal with in first year, especially just being in a hall where that stuff was kept pretty down low compared to my school. But yeah, I think it was just kind of the things that made the difference were like seeing the community spaces, seeing the people. Ecology is a really diverse degree just because ecology just brings in weird nerd kids. So there's a whole bunch of diverse people in there. And yeah, those things kind of were the game changers for me, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's important to realize that, because you mentioned that you had this expectation that it was gonna be like XYZ, and then you get here, you go, actually it's like ABC.
Yeah.
What's going on here? That happens to all of us, right? We all have expectations of things, and sometimes those expectations are in our mind only and doesn't happen in reality. So it's really awesome that you managed to find your group of your people, or your zones where you go, right, I actually can be comfortable in my space. But again, the other thing which you mentioned, which I think is really interesting for our listeners out there, is being Sri Lankan and queer. Like that's also another a minefield altogether. What is that like for you as a young person, and also as an individual?
Yeah, it's weird. So I'm not like, I have other friends that are also Sri Lankan and queer. And so I'm not the only one that I know. It's not that sort of unique experience, but it is like a tricky minefield. So my friends and I always have sort of like the balance of like, where does family come into that? How much of ourselves can we be open about? Being open down here, it can be one thing because Dunedin's a separate city to where most people are from. And then taking that out of like the little bubble of Dunedin and putting that back into reality of like, oh yeah, like I'm going home this summer, all of those kind of things. So it's odd in that regard. And then I also, so something that doesn't really apply to me, but just kind of like an interesting little like sidebar that I saw. I saw a Renews article the other day, which was talking about the kind of like difficulties of being Southeast Asian and LGBTQIA plus. Like it's kind of like an interesting minefield to navigate, both facing like kind of racism and homophobia. So yeah, I think that's kind of like a tricky space to be in, because sometimes it can feel like there's two communities and you're trying to like make your way into both of them, but that can have like parts that are and aren't accepting in each of them. So yeah, still navigating that one.
It's a tough one. Humans are crazy because humans like to put tick boxes, and then when the tick boxes are actually overlapping, they're like, oh, malfunction,
Yeah, this makes no
and it's
sense. What do we do?
exactly, and especially if there's if one of those boxes is something that is not a common thing, and you've got two non-common things that are together, you're like, oh, what is going on here? So it's crazy. Humans are just crazy, right? You're just like, hey, I can be everything. Or I can be
Mm,
nothing, whatever. But it's a tough one. But hey, I applaud you for traversing that line there because someone's
yeah.
got to do it, and hey, it's awesome that you're doing it with a smile on your face, which is fantastic. Um, so I'm gonna ask another question, which is just random. Now I was just thinking about this here. Living here in New Zealand as a Sri Lankan, what are your thoughts about this is political? What's happening
Oh,
in
yeah.
Sri Lanka? Has that because you said a lot of your family are still in Sri
Mm,
Lanka?
yeah.
What do you feel about that? Because
Yeah.
growing up when I was growing up, Sri Lanka was always a war zone. Like
Yeah.
then it was calm, all peace, and now it's
Mhm.
back to what is it like for you living here in New Zealand, seeing that unfold?
Yeah, so a lot of thoughts there. As a disclaimer, I am a relatively disconnected Dunedin student from the news. My TV doesn't have cable. Um,
Perfect.
yeah, I'm not like the most well versed on all of this, but I know what I know from my family
Yeah,
and
which is most
from the
important.
things that I have researched.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so like growing up, we always visit Sri Lanka every like 2 or 3 years to see the relatives. Um, Either that or they come here, but they're always freezing. And it's the times that I've gone growing up. So one time I was there, I was like 6, and I think I was 6, and the tsunami happened, the Boxing Day tsunami,
Oh wow.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and my parents went down to help out, and that was so intense. Um, Me and my sister just stayed in the hotel room, and once again, Sri Lanka under immense strife and immense like pain. Um, Another time that I was there, we went to an island that was. We only went there because my dad knew someone that could show us the island, but it was basically an active war zone, so they had military stationed all over the island, and we were just there having a swim,
Oh wow.
stuff that gets your head spinning. Um, and then now, obviously, we haven't gone because of the lockdowns to visit, and we still can't go because the situation it's not a place where you'd be sightseeing and trying to, hold hands and go on a little cute relatives trip. Um, so it's been hard to watch, especially like coming out of the lockdown, knowing that there was already something tough, and then it's been hard to watch in a few ways. One of them that I think being in New Zealand has been really hard to watch is the way that media has been translated overseas. So it's either so underrepresenting the problem as we do in New Zealand. It's always kind of like a bit of a filter to get international news into New Zealand media. But what has come through has been like not really a great representation of the problem. And it's allowed a lot of people to, so jumping onto a different thought. The regional council elections just happened. Regional council, or I don't know if it was someone that was running for either like the Dunedin Council or the Regional Council, when they were running, said something in their little election pamphlet that was like, oh, we can't be too environmental. We don't want to end up like Sri Lanka. And I was like, oh, you have no idea what you're talking about. It's such a complicated situation. You
Yeah.
can't just, yeah. And there's been a lot of people kind of inflating thoughts like that and not really researching it at all. And there's so many different things that came together to what happened, to define what happened to
Yeah.
Sri Lanka. It's just been taken so out of context, and it's been like really frustrating to see that, and to see my family still on the family group chat talking about the reality of the situation and how hard it is for them, and all of this just be misrepresented as some little irrelevant problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really quite crazy. And I can empathize, but I can't. It's obviously very different. When I watch news about Zimbabwe, and I just see what the media says, and I'm like, oh, you've just shown the little bits, the tiny 1% of the story. which is blown up to like 90%. And this is and the fact that you don't watch the news is actually a good thing. I don't watch the news as well because that's my own thing. But I think it's important to go right. What are the actual, what's the reality, what's the source? And as a researcher, that okay, cool, there's more to meet than meets the eye in a lot of scenarios. So I just wanted to find, because as someone that has a contact or a link to a country that's under strife at the moment, just to hear what your thoughts are. Yeah, now we'll jump again. We're getting all over the place here, which is great. So the other, so you now we come into you're at university. Ecology is your jam. Are there any other things that you start picking up while at university as a person? You go, right, cool. Now I'm now studying, but any other things that so you worked at Quarantine Island, you found your jam. Any other passions that you go, cool, this is now my values are now coming through that I can actually start putting into place?
Let me think. I guess thinking about it. Well, so I know your question was kind of like talking about things outside ecology, but the main thing that your question just makes me think of is just how much my ecological side has grown.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, so obviously I kind of like mentioned before that I had done a few things in high school, but a lot of those things I started off doing on the basis of like building up the uni resume, honestly. And they were great things. I was really happy to be doing them, but I was trying to figure out whether or not my heart was truly in them. And because of that, I didn't have like as much of a green thumb as I do now. And I didn't really know how to. Like my family, my mum came here from Sri Lanka. We had like our family troubles growing up, and we just didn't really have time to like think about, oh, we should get a compost bin, like it's not really something that's on the radar. And I came down to Dunedin and met so many people down here that were doing things so sustainably, living so sustainably. I met people that have gone plastic free. I've met people that just buy food at like markets and stuff to avoid all that kind of packaging. People that are doing so much work for sustainability committee, the sustainability office, just such like-minded people. And I went from, I don't know, not being able to keep a plant alive to I feel like I've actually really, really come into like being such a actually genuinely caring about ecology kind of person in as many ways in my life as I can,
Yeah, and I think that's cool, because I think it's cool to see the transition from purely academic to actually reality, because sometimes, I'm not, this is again a very generic comment. Sometimes we have this very academic thing that we do, but we don't filter it into our real lives. This is academic stuff, we get the grades, cool, it's going to get us our job, happy days, tick the box, but it doesn't actually filter into our real lives. And the purpose of the question was to go, hey, the stuff that you're actually learning is living it and seeing it, and actually it's not an academic process, it's a lifestyle that you've adapted and picked on, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, I think like lectures taught me, how to model a fisheries model and how to, understand if an ecosystem's about to collapse based on fluctuations in a whatever. But my friends really taught me how to like change my like the way that I was living, and actually like how to do things in like such fun ways that I feel like I've really come to enjoy doing those things. It's just seeing my friends do them. And it was like, and even like outside ecology, like my friend that does food science taught me how to, taught me so much about sustainable eating and all of those things. It's not even, not specific to the ecology department or degree at all, but I've learnt so much from the people that I've been around that have really kind of made me a very nature loving person.
Yeah, and I guess Tyler, what about you? I mean, because with your program, have you felt the same thing as well? I know that you really enjoy your Friday afternoons at the school. That's that's something different to what you would have thought of all those years ago.
Yeah, for sure. I've definitely changed my passion of what I've wanted to do, and I think probably my biggest realization was this year, going into the practicum setting. So going into schools and looking at helping with the holiday program, I realized that although I'm doing like the science side of things, I actually enjoy taking that knowledge and applying it more in a social setting or more in a physical activity and health setting more than a science setting per se. And I think that's been quite interesting because a lot of people, are usually quite focused or set in their major and what it's typically seen as doing. But I've actually realized that there's a lot more to come from sport and exercise science than just, doing analysis or stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think, I keep saying this over and over again because I think it's very true. And I think I would love a lot of people to realize is that the greatest learning at university happens outside of the classroom. The classroom teaches you the concepts, but like you said, Aneesa, and like you said, Tane, the stuff from the classroom is what you're taking you to outside. Your friends are going to start dictating how that works with you. Like Aneesa, you said your food science friend taught you about sustainable cooking, and like, well, okay, this is really cool. So it's I always encourage people. I'm not saying everyone should go to university, but I think people should be open-minded when they think about tertiary study. It's not just about the piece of paper that you're going to get. It's all those other things that are going to come along the way, which are non-tangible. I mean, if you think about the non-tangibles that the two of you have had, you couldn't weigh them, right? It's just priceless.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I've learned so much outside the classroom. I think, it's the same with high school. You do your papers and stuff, but it's about developing yourself as a person. Uni, I feel like, is so largely about independence and kind of really figuring out who you want to be. And I've just figured out a lot of myself and also just grown to be able to, take care of myself so much more than I don't know. Yeah, I think I've just grown so much from uni outside of the classroom is my moral of the story.
Yeah. That's a great moral right there. So now let's talk about your research. Did you do an honors year or so you did a 3-year program honors? Yes?
Not honors. Yeah. So did my bachelor's in ecology and zoology, and then am now doing my master's. It's a 2-year degree, and I've just done my first year, just finished off all my papers and handed in my research proposal. And then next year, the thesis year.
Let's talk about that there. Tell us about your research. What are you doing in your research?
Yeah. So kind of briefly mentioned before, I'm really excited to be doing it. So I'm working under Dr. Bridie Allen, and we are going to the Great Barrier Reef and investigating how heavy oil spills and microplastics interact to affect damselfish, which is a type of coral reef fish. So heading over, collecting a bunch of larval fish, bringing them into the lab, treating them with non-lethal doses of the heavy fuel oil and microplastics and an interactive treatment of both, and then putting some of them back out on the reef in on 2 little patch reefs, they're called, where you get a bit of coral and you put a fish on it, and these damselfish will just stay on their little bit of coral, and you can study their behavior, you can study their survival in situ in the environment, and also taking tissue samples so we can study their physiology in terms of oxidative stress. Yeah.
That all sounds pretty exciting and pretty cool.
Big scientific spiel.
Yeah. Did you choose a topic or did you fall into the topic? Because it's interesting, with when it comes to research, sometimes you fall into a topic because you've loved it, and sometimes you go, I just wanted to research. Hey, researcher, tell me hey, supervisor, give me a project, and because they always have things that they want to do.
Yeah, and some degrees, it varies so much between degrees and so much between supervisors. Sometimes you go into a lab and there's a few things you can research there because they've got projects that they're working on. But marine science is really good in how much you can just come up with something, and your supervisor will help you come up with it, but also it is just so free to do what you want to do. So yeah, I kind of looked at some reviews, looked at some knowledge gaps of the pollutant fields, and then came up with the idea and then fine-tuned it over the year.
Awesome. A very random question. As a marine scientist, do you get to snorkel and go in the ocean?
So I'm snorkeling for my research as well. We'll be like having a look at the fish on their little reefs regularly over 72 hours to see how, like, which ones are still surviving at regular intervals. So I just get to pop down and check in and see if they're still there, and then snorkel back up and then snorkel back down to all my little pictures. Yeah.
And do you get to go deep water diving anytime, or is that not a?
So I really plan to, and I was planning to do diving as part of my research as well. And someone else now has to do it because over the year I was going to get all my qualifications that I needed to, and I got one of them, and then I got COVID, and long COVID has messed up my asthma. So my asthma is now, I don't think it's in a good enough state for me to be diving. Yeah, but I can still snorkel. So yeah.
Snorkel, yeah.
Yeah.
Bloody long time. Yeah. At least you can get you into the water, because that would be a bit of a travesty if we could get you into the
Yeah.
water.
Yeah. And I did get my one little diving experience doing my open water up in, where were we doing it? Coromandel. I forget what town now, but it was like middle of summer, really, really warm water, having a look at like some nice, very kind of like warm water fish, gorgeous. So got my diving experience in, at least.
Awesome. Yep. Very, very, very cool. Very, very cool. And so I'm gonna segue back to year 13 Aneesa. So year 13 Aneesa, if we said to year 13 Aneesa that you were going to be going to the Great Barrier Reef to be doing this year, or you're gonna have a job after 3 years, what do you think? Which outcome do you think year 13 Aneesa would be saying is more realistic?
Realistic wise, job. Like, I would have loved to known that I would have been snorkeling in the Great Barrier Reef. I don't think I even thought that was an option back then. But I definitely planned to just get a job after my bachelor's and, you know, maybe study further in life, but I wasn't really having like big academia things on my mind. So yeah, I think it's even like last year, trying to decide whether I should do a master's this year or not. I had to talk to so many people. Talked to some lecturers outside the department as well, who have had me for a bunch of papers, who are basically like my mum at this point, and had to really, really spend so much time deciding because I was so uncertain whether I was going to work or do my master's or not. Now I'm really glad that I did my master's, but I don't think I could have imagined that we would have ended up at this spot.
Yeah, and I think that's Tane, because Tane is in this exact point. Tane is finishing his degree in a week's time, 2 weeks' time. And again, you know, if we said to you 3 years ago, hey Tane, you'd be at this point where you would actually have an option of doing postgrad, what would you have said at that point in time?
I probably wouldn't believe that, like, you know, like it's hard to comprehend, especially when you come from, again, coming from a small high school where, you know, yes, I was in the top academics, but in terms of nationwide, I wouldn't have thought that I would be up there for getting the grades that were sufficient to, you know, think about postgrad. And at that stage, all I was looking at was, okay, the next step is to try and push and get a degree.
Yeah, and now you're at this stage. How has that been for you? You know, because I know that you've got some cool plans for next year. How does that feel for next year?
It's very exciting. Like and I guess the biggest thing has been that I've been able to sit down with what I hope will be my supervisor to actually figure out what I want to research and something that I'm interested in. Because, you know, as much as it's cool to help a lecturer or a researcher out and do something that they're interested in, even if you are passionate about it, you know, I think putting all that time and effort into it, you want to at least try and make it something that's your own, because you're putting in just as much work as those top academics are as well. So you should at least get the credit of doing something that you were passionate about in the first place.
You're probably going to do more work, Tane, just letting you know. You're probably doing most of the work. Just letting you know. Is that true, Aneesa?
I mean, yeah, like I think, which one are we talking about? Okay, I'll just say the thought that I had. The doing something that you like really care about matters so much, because you are just going to be putting so much work in. You are going to be burnt out no matter what you do. So if you can at least have the drive of like doing something you're passionate about on your side. Plus, it's also just nice to come out with like, you know, I was really happy to be going in the direction that I'm going in, because now I'll have the skills to get jobs and things that I'm interested in, and the expertise in all these things that I'm kind of like hoping to keep going in. So it's nice to like put your time into something that you know you can kind of like continue in, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I think that's especially when you get to postgrad, it's something that you're going to spend a lot of time on it. And it's going to be, like you said, a lot of hours, and you want those hours to actually be passionate. And if you're going to burn out, you're burning out for a reason, but don't burn out, please, because that's not our goal.
Yeah.
Awesome. We've been talking for almost an hour now, Aneesa. I mean, we could keep talking and keep going and go down different pathways. One pathway I do want to talk about is, before we wrap up, is um, as a young person, what was lockdown like for you? Because especially in the sense of someone doing ecology, so you see humans are all were locked away, and now the world is just flourishing according to the media. You're seeing all this diversity of creatures just everywhere. What is that like for you as an ecologist, seeing that just happen?
Yeah. Oh my God, it was so interesting. I think like we had Cardiaria falcons come to Wellington town, just sitting on lampposts and things. It was fascinating. I think I've always kind of, as an ecologist, and especially going through my degree, I love people, but there's also just so much that frustrates me about the world, as most would feel, I think. Um, and it was so interesting to just see like, oh, okay, this is kind of what the world would be like if we just like,
Stopped.
disappeared for a second, like just a second. And it was nice. It was really calm, rollerblading around on highway streets because I lived on Great King Street. Just hearing like just the birds, no like car noise, going to, anywhere and just like seeing how much nature there was, and then seeing all the stuff on the news about like the way things were recovering, some of which were a bit, you know, scientifically questionable, having a look at those journal articles, but some of which were like really, really amazing. So yeah, obviously such a tough time for people, which is why it's kind of like the continual struggle of like, oh,
Yeah.
being pulled either way. But yeah, it was just really nice to see like nature at least getting like a breath in. Yeah.
I ask you because, as someone working in the space here, and you mentioned at the start that you're looking at, how humanity, the stresses on the environment, there was a clear indication of zero stress, well, very minimal stress in the environment, because we couldn't drive our cars, we couldn't fly our planes, we couldn't
Yep.
do anything. So boom, very minimal stress in the environment, and it just sort of just said, hey, nature can survive without humans. We don't need you
Yeah.
guys to be around.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just
Yeah.
it just shows you the vulnerability of humanity, right? Well, that's really deep.
Yeah. No, yeah. I think I've had so many existentials about this very exact topic going through my degree of just like, oh, it's like an interesting thought. I was like, wow, just how nature would be, and of course humans are a part of the environment. So you
Totally.
can't be like, oh, we're messing up the environment because say like looking at indigenous cultures and stuff, we've existed as a part of the system for so many years, but it's like kind of turning the tap off of the real big stuff, like the big industry stuff that really just kind of, puts it in perspective of like, oh yeah, nature does just like thrive, just wants to bounce back when it gets a chance to.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a topic we keep talking forever and ever, because
Yeah.
it is controversial, it is real, and it's that fine line, you know. But we're not going to do that there. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to ask you a question which we love to ask all our guests. Our podcast is called Baskets of Knowledge, and each of our guests has had an amazing experience, or a lived experience so far. And we'd love you to share one piece of knowledge that we could put into our basket of knowledge, or listeners can put into our basket of knowledge, based on your experiences as in whatever sphere you like. One piece of knowledge.
I guess like just going off the chats that we've been having, something that just like springs to mind is being like a critical scientist when you see things in the media. And I think that kind of goes back to a whole bunch of things we've been talking about, just and also to my degree. One of the main things that I've been taught is like constantly be critical, constantly check your sources. Don't just let people tell you that something is the way it is. You can do the research yourself. And I think like I was talking about this with a lecturer, scientific literacy in New Zealand is kind of pretty low at the moment, especially like in CA. There's like some research that she was showing me about like how in high school scientific literacy has just really gone down. And I think just learning, like, if you don't know the ways to like be scientifically critical, you can like put some time into researching it. You can see what you can find on Google Scholar, or I don't know, see what people that you can find out there. But just being critical, having more than like one source for things, and just like not just trusting what the media is trying to angle you on for something. Yeah, that's just my like spiel for anyone out there. Important life
Yeah,
advice.
I like that. Be critical, and it's not being critical in a bad way. It's being just being critically analyze what the information is. And I guess that's so topical in the world today when there's, we're living in a world at the moment where we have got so much information, the most amount of information ever in human history, right? And some of the information is factually correct, and some of it is factually incorrect. But as a person that's receiving the information, we have to be able to critically analyze what is correct, what is incorrect, what is true, what is fact, what is opinion. And I think that's a really, really awesome takeaway, because it transcends everything, not just academia. So I think that's a really awesome learning. Thank you very much for sharing that. Tanya, any last words?
I guess just touching on that, I guess where that will come from is, and I guess something that I've learned through my degree as well, is that, like we have a lot of people who study science and they want to be critical, but then the real lack that we have at the moment is that the people that do this research aren't able to communicate in a way that everyone can understand and everyone can value. So I guess that's where the real gap is at the moment, is the difference between the top academics that can do all this amazing research, but we just don't have it communicated to all the streams that actually need it and who will actually benefit from it. And I guess that's where the gap will come. But I guess also the other thing that I've enjoyed about this podcast is being able to reflect on my degree. And I guess as I am, finishing exams now and reflecting on my degree, it's been good to see, like the things that I reflect on are the people I've met and the things that I've done outside of my degree, or where I've actually applied the things I've learned in the class. And I think that's the benefit of going to university, not the paper itself, it's the things you do around it.
Awesome. What a great share from both of you. And I think that's a great way to end this conversation for today. Aneesa, thank you so much for jumping on today. Thank you for giving us your time. I look forward to seeing how you grow as a researcher and whatever happens next for you. And we might get you back on here later on to tell us about your experience on the Great Barrier Reef. But thank you very much for your time. Tanya, always good to see you. And to all the listeners out there, thank you for listening in. Hopefully you found one piece of nugget of knowledge in today's conversation. If you haven't, why not re-listen to the podcast? You're going to find something. As always, please feel free to share, like, comment on our podcast, as we'd like this to reach as many people as possible. Till next time, ka kite. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Baskets of Knowledge.
Yeah, we hope that you found something useful to put into your basket of knowledge. And as we said before, remember to put something little into your baskets of knowledge every week. And as always, feel free to like, comment, and share this podcast. Thanks, everybody. Bye.